Alyssa Ann Burkett was born on December 31, 1995, in Mesquite, Texas, to parents Josh and Teresa. At 24, Alyssa was living in Royce City, Texas, and was a doting mother to her 1-year-old daughter, Willow Ann. She was described as strong-willed, ambitious, and fiercely determined individual. She had many friends and was considered a natural leader among them. That is, until her life was tragically cut short. In the fall of 2020, Alyssa had been going through a bitter custody battle with her ex-boyfriend, Andrew Charles Beard, and the dispute had grown increasingly volatile. Then, on October 2nd, Alyssa was found brutally murdered outside her place of employment in Carrollton, Texas. That morning, Alyssa had just pulled up to work at the Green Tree Apartments leasing office and was sitting in her car when a man with his face painted black walked up to her vehicle and shot her. In shock, Alyssa staggered out of the car, where the assailant stabbed her multiple times before fleeing the scene. Immediately following her murder, her mother, Teresa, and the rest of the family suspected her ex, Andrew Beard. Even investigators considered him the prime suspect after only an hour after the murder. Beard was engaged to Holly Ann Elkins, who hated Alyssa. Leading up to the murder, Alyssa had been the target of multiple attacks designed to ruin her reputation, incriminate her, and manipulate law enforcement into believing she was a danger to her child. A GPS tracker was found on her car, and someone had made a 911 call claiming that Alyssa was driving erratically. At one point, an anonymous call was placed to police and falsely claimed that Alyssa was a drug dealer. When police investigated, they found that drugs and a firearm had been planted in Alyssa's vehicle. It didn't take investigators long after the murder to figure out that Beard and Elkins were involved and behind all the attacks and false reporting against Alyssa. When investigators searched their home, they found an envelope addressed to Beard with Alyssa's license plate number, the color, and model of the vehicle, all information you would need to make a false police report. It was also uncovered that Beard and Elkins had even hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Alyssa, but nothing was found, and this is what pretty much set the stage for what came next. In the weeks before the murder, Beard and Elkins carefully planned the attack. On September 11th, Beard purchased a black rain suit with cash. A few days later, Elkins bought dark makeup, which Beard later used to disguise himself as a black man during the killing. Then, on September 19th, they purchased 410 shotgun shells and a Camulus knife, the weapons used in Alyssa's murder. On the morning of October 2nd, Beard put his plan into action. With the rain suit on and his face painted black, he approached Alyssa in her car outside her workplace. He shot her in the head with a shotgun, then walked away. As she attempted to escape, he returned and stabbed her multiple times, ensuring she wouldn't survive. While all this was going on, Elkins stayed at his home with Willow and later provided a false alibi for Beard, claiming he was home the entire time. Regardless of their attempts to hide their crime, both Beard and Elkins were arrested and charged in Alyssa's death. In 2022, Beard pleaded guilty to cyberstalking, resulting in death, and using a firearm in a violent crime. He was then sentenced to 43 years in federal prison. In April 2024, Elkins was convicted of conspiracy to stalking using a dangerous weapon resulting in death, and brandishing a firearm in relation to a crime of violence. In August 2024, she was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in federal prison. Following the murder, Alyssa's family gained custody of Willow and remains committed to preserving Alyssa's memory. Christe Chen Dawson was a highly accomplished pharmaceutical scientist who graduated from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. She was widely recognized from her research in pharmaceutical sciences, particularly in social determinants of health in low-income communities. In 2022, 36-year-old Christe was working as a pharmacist at the Kroger grocery store in Memphis and had recently been promoted to store manager based at the Mendenhall location. She was married to Bradley Robert Dawson, a 40-year-old IT specialist employed at Youth Villages, a nonprofit child welfare organization. The two met in November 2021 and married just 3 months later. Shortly after their wedding, they traveled to Fiji for what was supposed to be a dream honeymoon at the exclusive Turtle Island Resort, a 500-acre private retreat known for hosting only 14 couples at a time. The resort, famous for being the filming location of the movie The Blue Lagoon, had particular significance for Bradley, who had been there before with his ex-wife. Bradley was from Middletown, New York, and had been married once before, tying the knot in Yarrow, Fiji, in September 2019. However, the marriage only lasted 2 years, and he filed for divorce in September 2021, citing irreconcilable differences. The divorce was then finalized a month before he married Christe. Unfortunately for Christe, her marriage would not end as civilized. On the evening of July 8, 2022, she and Bradley were seen drinking and dancing at the resort's floating bar. At some point, the two got into an argument before returning to their private cottage. As the night progressed, guests in nearby accommodations reported hearing loud banging noises and a scream coming from their suite. The next day, they failed to show up for breakfast and lunch, which concerned hotel staff. Despite a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the door, a housekeeper was eventually sent to check on them. When they entered the room, they found Christe dead in the bathroom. She had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head, with multiple injuries across her body. An autopsy later confirmed that she had died from a traumatic brain injury. As for Bradley, he was nowhere to be found. He was located at Matakawalevu Village, carrying his passport, Christie's credit cards, both of their driver's license, and $1,000 in cash. They located him after indigenous residents of the village turned him in. He was then arrested and charged with Christie's murder. He initially confessed, but later retracted it, denying he had admitted to the crime. Regardless of his retraction, his unsigned statement was still read in court. In the statement, Bradley said that the night began at a beach party with staff and other resort guests, where Christe was taking shots while he drank kava, a traditional Fijian beverage. He stated that they had argued on their way back to the cottage, but could not recall the details due to their intoxication. According to his account, the argument escalated in the bathroom, where Christe allegedly pushed him. He claimed that in response, he lost it, leading to a violent altercation that resulted in a broken toilet, shattered glass, and a chaotic scene. He said Christe was bleeding and sitting on the bathroom floor, injured. Her injuries were so severe that embalming was impossible. Her parents had no choice but to cremate her remains before bringing her ashes back to the United States. Their grief was compounded by the fact that they had funded the couple's honeymoon, never imagining the horror that would unfold. After an 8-day trial in December of 2024, he was found guilty of murder. On February 11, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years before he would be eligible for parole. At 75 years old, Earnestine Mortimore lived in Riviera Beach, Florida, where she was well known for her kindness and willingness to help her neighbors. Sadly, on April 28, 1995, she was found beat and strangled to death inside her own home. Investigators quickly identified a potential suspect, Ernestine's neighbor, Willie Rogers, along with another man. Neighbors had pointed to both men during the early stages of the investigation, and detectives collected DNA samples from them. However, both denied involvement, and without enough evidence to tie them to the crime, they were released. Over time, the case went cold, as detectives were unable to uncover any new leads that could bring them closer to justice. In November 2022, the Riviera Beach Police Department established a cold case unit to revisit unsolved murders dating back to the 1960s. In 2023, detectives reopened Ernestine's case, utilizing advancements in forensic technology to re-examine evidence. One crucial piece was a blood sample collected from Rogers during the original investigation in the 1990s. At the time, blood draws were more common in forensic investigations due to the limitations of DNA technology. In May 2023, detectives sent multiple pieces of evidence to Bode Forensic Technology Lab in Virginia for advanced DNA testing. A year later, the results came back, conclusively identifying Rogers as the primary suspect in Earnestine's murder. Authorities believe that on the night of the attack, 27-year-old Rogers broke into Earnestine's home, intending to rob her, but the situation escalated into a violent murder. Rogers had a criminal history in the 1990s, with prior convictions including sexual battery and burglary. At the time of his identification in 2024, he was already incarcerated in Alachua County for an unrelated case, with a scheduled release date of May 15, 2032. On January 30, 2025, he was officially indicted for Earnestine's murder and is currently awaiting the outcome of the case. 51-year-old Maryna Stetsenko and her 27-year-old daughter, Margarita Razaz, who went by Rita, had fled the war in Ukraine and settled in Germany. Before the war, Rita had built a small culinary business, specializing in custom cakes and edible bouquets. When Russia's full-scale invasion began, she and her mother left Ukraine, first finding refuge in Slovakia before relocating to Mannheim, Germany, in late 2023. In January 2024, Rita gave birth to her daughter Maya. Unfortunately, their lives in Germany would be nothing short of a nightmare. 43-year-old Marco O. and his 45-year-old Russian wife Ina were obsessed with raising a daughter of their own. However, they had dealt with multiple miscarriages and unsuccessful fertility treatments and were at their wits' end. That's when they decided to do the unthinkable and orchestrated a gruesome plot to abduct a newborn by murdering the mother and anyone that stood in their way. Using the messaging platform Telegram, they posed as volunteers, helping Ukrainian refugees with translation and support, and that's how they met Rita, who was pregnant at the time. After Mia was born, they invited Rita and Maryna over for dinner, and they accepted, unaware of the horrors that awaited. On March 6, 2024, during their meal, Marco and Ina drugged both women with sedatives. When Maryna began feeling unwell, they pretended to take her to the hospital, but Marco instead drove her to a secluded lake where he bludgeoned her to death and disposed of her body in the water. Upon returning, he deceived Rita by telling her that her mother had suffered a heart attack and was receiving treatment. Dazed from the drugs, she believed them and accepted their offer to take her and Maya to visit Maryna at the hospital. Instead, Marco drove them to an isolated area near the Rhine River, where he brutally struck Rita on the head multiple times before setting her body on fire. The couple then took 5-week-old Mia home, intending to pass her off as their own child. The following day, a passerby discovered Rita's burned remains. Authorities initially struggled to identify her, but after friends reported her missing, they put 2 and 2 together. Meanwhile, Maryna and Mia were still unaccounted for. As investigators intensified their search, they quickly traced the murders to Marco and Ina, who had erased their social media presence and attempted to conceal their involvement. The couple was then arrested on March 13th and charged with the murders, and baby Mia was safely recovered. 6 days later, on March 19th, Maryna's body was discovered on the shore of a lake near Hockenheim. During the trial, Marco and Ina admitted to their roles in the murders. Marco expressed regret, stating, "I regret everything I have done," while Ina described it as a big mistake. The Mannheim court found their crimes exceptionally severe and sentenced them to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. They were also ordered to pay 10,000 euros in compensation and 5,000 euros in damages to the victims' surviving relatives. Now, 1-year-old Mia has been returned to Ukraine, where she is being raised by her aunt and uncle. Scarlett Vickers was born to Sarah Hall and Simon Vickers and grew up in Darlington County, Durham, England. At just 14 years old, Scarlett was described as a normal, cheeky teenager who excelled at most things she did. However, an innocent moment at home would lead to a horrific murder. On the evening of July 5, 2024, her father, Simon, had been drinking wine, smoking cannabis, and watching the Euros football tournament. Scarlett eventually came downstairs and joined her parents, and they began playfully throwing grapes at each other. At some point, Scarlett grabbed a pair of tongs and snapped them playfully at Simon, who complained that she hurt him. Scarlett then teased him, calling him wimpy. Moments later, she was bleeding out on the kitchen floor with a knife lodged 4 inches into her chest. Sarah quickly called 999 and told the operator that they had all been messing around when Simon retaliated after being called wimpy. According to him, he thought he was throwing a pair of tongs at her, not realizing he had quickly picked up a knife. When paramedics arrived, they found Scarlett dead on the kitchen floor from her injuries. Simon was then arrested and charged with her death, all the while continuing to claim it was a freak accident. However, forensic evidence completed contradicted his version of events. A pathologist testified that the knife lodged in Scarlett had to be firmly held and thrust with force, making the claims of a freak accident impossible. Prosecutors alleged that Simon stabbed Scarlett in the chest after being upset about being called a wimp. Many were left wondering how a father could murder his own 14-year-old daughter after such a silly comment. However, as the trial unfolded, Simon's violent past came into focus. In 1993, at just 19 years old, he was convicted of wounding with intent after slashing a man's face with a Stanley knife and was required to serve 2 years in detention. Despite this history, Sarah Hall, along with Simon's parents, Barry and Pat, stood by him. However, a jury disagreed and found him guilty of murder, leaving Sarah and other family members visibly stunned. On February 10, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years.